Hi everybody, I'm David and welcome back to Dynamo Sword Channel. So today I'm going to be presenting a new series to the channel, and the name of that series is Sword Re-Reviews. So what is a sword re-review? Well, I'm taking a sword I previously reviewed in written format, and I'm not only updating that into video, but I'm also doing a follow-up to let you all know how well that sword has held up in the time that I've owned it. Now, I've owned many of the swords in my collection for quite a few years, so unfortunately, some of the swords have been discontinued by their manufacturer. I feel, though, that sword re-reviews will not only be beneficial to those interested in learning about the sword, for example, someone purchasing it on the secondhand market, but if popular enough, they may also bring attention to the manufacturer or vendors to offer a reissue for those interested in buying a sword featured on sword re-reviews. So with that, let's get on with the first sword re-review. And that first sword is going to be the Windlass Oakeshott Type 14. So stick around and I'll see you soon with the review. Alright, welcome back. So I thought I'd start the review with a quick overview of the sword, and then we'd move on to statistics. So as mentioned in the name of this sword, this is a Type 14 in the Oakeshott typology. So what does that mean? Well, if you're not familiar with the Oakeshott typology, it is a classification of medieval swords based on their blade profiles as well as their various hilt pieces. Now, if you're interested in more details on the typology, you're going to be in luck because I plan on doing a future series on the Oakeshott typology. But until then, here's a quick crash course on this sword in particular. Alright, so what makes a sword a Type 14, or this sword a Type 14 in general? Well, there are two defining features of the 14. Number one is that they're quite broad for arming swords. On average, the blade width of a Type 14 is anywhere from 3 inches to even up to 4 inches at the base of the blade that tapers down. The other one, as you can see, is that these are actually relatively short for an arming sword. Now, an average arming sword length is around 30 to 32 inches. The average Type 14 is actually around 24 to 27 inches. Now, there are a few historically that do reach average arming sword lengths, but more commonly they fit between that 24-27 inch range. Now, the Type 14 is considered by most to be the most transitional of blade profiles due to its placement in the typology. In the Oakeshott typology, two classes of blade profiles can be seen. There's Class 1, which consists of flat lenticular cross-section blades for cutting, and then you have Class 2, which consists of diamond and hexagonal cross-section blades for added thrusting capabilities. The Type 14 is the latest in Class 1 and also offers the most acute tip suited for thrusting, though it still keeps that broad, flat midsection for cutting. Now, the Type 14 seems to be a popular sword for its time. It is one of the most seen blade types in burial effigies, as well as in medieval art. As far as battlefield use, the Type 14 seemed to be favored by the knight on horseback, and seems to be the precursor to the later period riding sword. This sword is also pretty popular in the manuscripts of the time. Most notably the Fetchbuch manuscript of Germany, where you see this sword be used with bucklers. So you see the sword and buckler, you see the close quarter, and you kind of see that, pretty popular. The other thing that you see with this sword type is, as again, being transitional, it doesn't really last long as far as battlefield use. Again, you see it in the medieval art, you see it in the effigies, but being transitional, it's pretty short for a blade type. only about 100 years. Now, one thing specific about this sword, and in regards to historical accuracy, especially for a budget sword, is that it is based off a historical original that was found in the Chartres Cathedral in France. Now, the sword is said to have been deposited in the cathedral in 1308 by King Philip IV of France, who deposited the sword and his armor in gratitude for a decisive battle victory at the time. So, little bit of notoriety to the sword being the sword of a king, or the supposed sword of a king. So that was just a quick overview, both historically and of the sword type. Next I'll be moving on to statistics, and then we'll move on to cutting. So we'll see you in a bit. Alright, welcome back. So now let's look at some statistics of the sword. So starting, the overall length of the sword is 33 inches. The point of balance is about 4 inches on the blade, and the weight of the blade is right at 2.5 pounds. The center of percussion is 16 inches from the base of the blade. So right about there, see, right where the fuller ends. So next we'll look at the blade. So the blade is made of high carbon steel and has, as you can see, a mirror polish. I'm not entirely sure what grade of steel was used, but normally Windlass uses either a 1060, 1065, or 1075. So I'm assuming it's at least one of those. It is well tempered and sharp, and this sword received the in-house museum replica sharpening service. Now the overall blade length is 26 inches long. The base width is right at 2 3/4 inches, and that moderately tapers down to about 1 inch right before the tip. Now this sword features a shallow fuller that ends around 3/4 inches of the blade, and it has a flattened diamond cross section. Now there isn't much distal taper to this blade, but again, that isn't uncommon for Windlass swords. Next, we'll look at the guard. Now the guard is classified as a style 7 in the Oakeshott typology. And what defines a style 7 guard is its broad, flat, rectangular shape and its curved quillions. Its total length from quillion to quillion is 7 inches long, and the quillion thickness is about 1/2 inch on both sides. So it's a little thick, but still, pretty decent. Now, it is fitted flush to the grip, and there's no rattle or movement. There is the normal, as you can see, Windlass kind of gap, but I think the gap, it's a little misleading, because the gap's there, if you're worried about things getting down into like water or anything getting down into the tang, but it's not just an open hole. A lot of people, I think, kind of get misled to think that it's just kind of like an open hole and it's just kind of loose, and that's why they rattle. It is seated in. It could be, a little fitted in a little more, but as a production piece, it's fitted straight, sits well on the shoulders, so you can't really complain too much, especially for the price. Now, as far as the grip actually, in my opinion, is a little long for an arming sword. Now, this wasn't uncommon for a Type 14 though. They tend to have on average a little bit longer grip. Not a full 1.5 hand grip, but still just about, maybe an extra inch to 1/2 inch. The total length of this grip is 4 inches, and the circumference is about 3 1/4 inches, and that lightly tapers to about 14 inches at the pommel. There is a central ridge to this grip. You can't really see it, um, but you can feel it. So it's just a little added, touch that Windlass added. Um, the grip, as you can see, is not the stock grip. Now, I tend to like to rewrap my swords. As you saw in my previous video, I made that handle for the Honshu broadsword. Pretty much as soon as I got this sword, Windlass stock grips aren't always the greatest. A lot of people don't like the stitched seam, which can kind of be uncomfortable in the hand, or the leather's just kind of on the cheaper side. It's always basic black. Sometimes they have risers and a little more aesthetic. Usually they don't. So with my swords, typically, just as I mentioned before in that previous video, it's kind of a side hobby of my enthusiasm, but as well, just makes the sword better handling and better better use out of it, as well as just looks better. So anyway, so I just took a brown calfskin, added some risers, did a cord under wrap, and pretty basic grip rewrap. So pretty good handle. Like I said, it is a little long, so you have that extra space, but historically accurate as far as Type 14s go. They all tended to have that kind of extra layer. statistics. Next we'll be doing the cutting video, and then I'll go to final thoughts. So stick around and we'll see you in a little bit. Alright, welcome back. So as I mentioned before, this isn't only a review, but also a re-review. So I'll go over a few of those re-review points here in the final thoughts. So I've owned this sword for a little over 3 years now. I received this sword secondhand through a trade on Sword Fighter's Guide forum with another member. Now in those 3 years, as you can see, the sword's held up really well. No real damage to the blade, no looseness. I keep my swords relatively clean. I polish them anywhere from 2 to 3 times a month, so you could say I kind of baby my swords, but it goes to show that if you take care of a sword, it doesn't matter if it's a high-end production, custom, or even a budget production piece, they'll retain their value and they will hold up as long as you